Hello, everyone. I want to extend my gratitude to Ana, Maria, and the entire team involved in organizing this conference. It is a pleasure to virtually present my paper titled Feminist Archipelagos, Remapping Photography Art History from a Relational Lens in response to the conference guiding question, what would an inclusive histories of women's photography look like from a transnational and decolonial perspective? This paper is part of an ongoing research endeavor exploring the potential of the archipelagic method, first, as a model for complexifying Latinx and photography art history, that is a model to challenge the conventional notions of Latinidad and continental photography history, taking as a reference Caribbean intellectual thought, and second, as a poetic tool to foment an international network of women photography organizations where sisterhood, solidarity, and cooperation are core values. My name is Aldeide Delgado. I am a Cuban-born, Miami-based Latinx art historian and curator. I am the founder of the nonprofit organization Women's Photographers International Archive, WOFA, established in Miami in 2018 in response to the absence of specialized institutions dedicated to preserving and documenting the work of women photographers. Our organization's mission is to conduct research, promote, support, and educate about the contributions of women and non-binary photographers to modern and contemporary art. We have a strong focus on historical research, generating rigorous academic content with particular attention to the diverse artistic production of Latin American and Latinx communities. This includes photographers from Mexico, Central and South America, the Caribbean, and artists of Latin American descent living and working in the US. By embracing Miami as a border space, I see WOFA as a meeting place and understand photography as a collaborative tool for connecting and creating community. This meeting place is not static, it is not frozen in time. Instead, it is a dynamic process shaped by social interactions, multiple identities, and histories that define its specificity. I want to start this session with an operative starting point. Latinx art studies urgently need new border crossings methodologies to challenge the current academic and art historical frameworks. According to art historian Elizabeth Ferrer, photography by Latinx artists has been essentially excluded from the documented history of photography. There have been no book on the subject before, no comprehensive museum exhibition, and little discussion of these photographers in scholarly discourse or within the photo community at large. Latinx photography in the US can be understood as part of a group of studies that challenge the continental history of photography and the omission of intersectional narratives in the art world. I introduced the concept of continental photography history to categorize the traditional understanding of photography history from the geographically centered perspective of Europe, mainly Germany, France, and UK, and the United States, where local authors and their stories are often assumed to be universal givens. To trace different cartographies of knowledge and to document women and non-binary photographers from regions outside the canon of photography history, I have immersed myself in the study of Caribbean writers and intellectuals over the past 3 years, engaging with figures like Edward Glissant or Derek Walcott is not arbitrary when exploring Latinx and photography art history. As expressed by scholars Tatiana Flores and Michelle Stephens, an insular narrative makes sense because it brings to the fore issues arising from the colonial legacy, such as sovereignty, migration, sustainability, and of course, race and ethnicity, that are relevant to the Latin American region as a whole, but that simply cannot be overlooked when dealing with the Caribbean. Likewise, recent critical approaches to continental photography history find the inauguration of photography related to the fateful landing in the New World of Christopher Columbus in 1492 and the logic of European colonialism. Authors such as Ariela Zulay, in her book Potential History, call us to unlearn the accepted origins of photography and those of the New World and their familiar spatial and temporal connotations. The complicity of photography within the Imperial project is revealed in the work of photo-based artist Stacey Tyrrell. Born in Canada to parents from Nevis of Scottish descent, Tyrrell's visual practice explores identity, race, and heritage as it relates to the specificity of the Caribbean and its diaspora. In the series I am showing in the slide, she researched the Eurocentric constructs of white and Black femininity by embodying the allegorical personifications of major powers involved in the slave trade, such as Spain, Portugal, England, among others. Inspired by other remarkable artists such as Cindy Sherman and Nikki Lee, she transforms her Black skin tone and physical features through self-portraits of historical women characters such as Colombia, Britannia, and Hispania. These images reveal an idealized canon that represents white women and, by extension, the imperial motherland as pure, civilized, and glorious. In contrast, she argues, asexualized and racialized women would not be deserving of respect. Tyrrell's work also facilitates an interrogation of the Caribbean beyond national state divisions. When viewing all her photographs together, from this series together, the notion of serial colonialism becomes apparent. I will revisit this term later. In 1493, Columbus sighted the island of Nevis, subsequently leading to its colonization by the Spanish, the Dutch, and ultimately the British. However, what is the archipelagic method and how does it operate in practice? Does it focus on the archipelago as the subject of representation for a potential historiography? How this method contributes to more inclusive histories of women's photography from a transnational and decolonial perspective. The archipelagic methods allow us to expand a scholarship on in Latinx and photography history. In this context, the archipelago moves beyond the traditional understanding of the archipelago with physical, the association of the archipelago with physical island clusters. Instead, thinking with the archipelago or thinking archipelagically constitutes a provocative, open quote, analytical framework to interrogate epistemologies, ways of thinking, and methodologies informed implicitly or explicitly by continental paradigms and perspectives, end of quote. For Edward Glissant, the great narratives of the world, which aim at unification, totalization, and reducing complicity, describe a continental consciousness. In contrast, the archipelagic method foregrounds the abyss consciousness, that is an acknowledgement of the historical suffering arising from the unknown projected by the forced voyage of enslaved Africans across the Atlantic Ocean to the New World. The abyss consciousness grants a political condition where the unknown becomes knowledge transmitted across generations among those who have experienced the abyss. This approach is particularly helpful to shed light on the work of studio portrait and street photographer Moira Pernambuco. Living in the US since age 10, Pernambuco's creative practice finds inspiration in her multiracial heritage as an Amerindian Guyanese photographer of African descent. From 1995 to 1998, she developed one of her most acclaimed documentary series entitled A Tribute to the Ancestors of the Middle Passage. It consists of Black and white portraits taken of participants at an annual ceremony on the shores of the Atlantic Ocean on Coney Island in New York. Dressed in white as a symbol of healing, purification, and spirituality, participants bring flowers and pray to the Orishas to honor the lives lost during the transatlantic slave trade. As a multiracial artist, this artwork marked the first time Pernambuco specifically addressed her identity as a person of African descent and the relationship with the ocean as a place of memory and trauma. The titles of the photograph in the series reinforce the idea of the abyss or a shared legacy between the subjects and herself. There is a poetic relation between the abyss of the Middle Passage as a traumatic experience in Glissant's writing and the colonial wound in Walter's Mignolo discourse. The wound of coloniality hidden under the narrative of modernity. According to anthropologist and researcher Arturo Escobar, one of the main disciplinary contributions of the modernity coloniality group integrated by Walter Mignolo, Enrique Dussel, Aníbal Quijano, among many others, is deviating from considering Latin America as an object of study, instead transforming it into an epistemic perspective with a tradition of intellectual thought. The imaginary of the modern colonial world must be understood from a geohistorical and critical Latin American perspective. However, and this is important, I am taking this statement further by emphasizing that debates on the imaginary of the modern colonial world shortcomings from the critical and geohistorical perspective of the Caribbean because it is in the region that European colonialism began to unfold. As expressed by philosopher Nelson Maldonado Torres, it is important to decontinentalize the Americas thinking by focusing on the Caribbean, its historical transcendence, and its philosophical, creative, and artistic production. This consideration is crucial as the Caribbean is frequently excluded from the discourses on Latinx and photography art history. I am showing here this series by artist Joiri Minaya, an artist born in Dominican Republic, living in the US. The title of the series is Encubrimiento, the cloaking, and through this series of performance that includes like performance, photographic work, the artist challenged the presence of colonial status in urban spaces. Using colorful spandex fabric, Minaya conceals these monuments while simultaneously drawing attention to them, prompting viewers to question which narratives are memorialized and which are omitted. The fabric features patterns designed by the artist, incorporating plants used in Native American, Black, and Afro-Caribbean traditions as metaphors of resistance. These plants often symbolize duality, with properties ranging from poison healing to poison defense, as well as purging, cleansing, and protection from evil spirits. By wrapping solid phallic bronze statues in soft, gender-like materials like spandex, Minaya creates playful and amorphous silhouettes, subverting the patriarchal and authoritarian visual codes associated with these monuments. The archipelagic method proves to be a useful tool to emphasize relationality and demonstrate the infinite layers of Latinidad. Relationality consists of unveiling the, open quote, entangled historical, material, and affective connections that would otherwise be obscured by dominant, untruncated, and high historical narratives, end quote. Infinitude refers to, open quote, moving away from the explorer's method and toward the anti-explorer's method, which involves looking at the supposedly known world and attesting to its final unknowability, end quote. Extrapolating this idea to understand Latinx and photography art history, we must consider the impossibility of measuring identity as fixed and monolithic. For example, in the installation Terrestrial Bodies, visual artist Juana Valdez displays the ancestral timeline of her mother going back 8 generations to reflect her multi-ethnic identity at the crossroads between Africa, Asia, and the Americas. Nevertheless, as we approach any national identifiers such as Congolese or Indonesian, we will find the same query on the contingent and overlapping character of identity again and again, stemming from these regions' unique processes of creolization. Juana Valdez's work is informed by her Afro-Cuban ethnicity and the experience of growing up in the US. Functioning as an archive, the artist says she researched the history and origin of objects that map the complex terrain of multiple cultures and nations that constitute her own identity, and how it is constantly shaped and reshaped by experiences of displacement and transculturation. In the series Imperial China that I am bringing to you, she creates 55 images that catalog the front and back of mass-produced collectible ceramic objects. It traces the trading history of bone china, a type of porcelain appropriated from Asia and exported to the Americas as an economic commodity. In Valdez's words, she used bone china's natural property as a resource on which to build and extrapolate history as a material or a prefabricated resource. She questions the origins of the objects, but also the body and hand that made them. This body and object relationship has become a recurring element in her work, associating the deportation of Black individuals of African descent as a raw material and commercial good with a massive violent expropriation of objects that began in the 16th and 17th centuries as part of the imperial discourse. I would like to present the work of visual artist Fariha Aliyah Shah, who was our artist in residence last year in Miami in dialogue with the work of Juana Valdez. Fariha Aliyah Shah, born in Canada to parents from Guyana, and in this series, she used self-portrait to reclaim her origin story through a decolonized perspective. The work examines her historical family migration in relation to colonial exploitation of commodities from Africa and India, and uses these colonial tropes in the imagery to comment on identity formation and the burden of cultural hybridity. It's very important, and I know that I am not having too much time left, but it's very important to bring attention to the notion of Latinidad, to the questioning of which regions are included and which are not in the notion of Latinidad, as referred by author Juana Maria Rodriguez in her book Queer Latinidad. According to her, if Dominicanas are Latinas, are Haitianas Latinas too? Geographically, they share the same island in Mismo Caribe. And what can we say about those multilingual islands that defy easy classification, such as Aruba, Curacao, Trinidad? Are they part of the Mundo Latino? Even when we think of South and Central America, do we forget the English and Creole-speaking countries of Guyana, Suriname, and Belize, or the polylingual regions of Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Panama? How do we categorize the huge Portuguese-speaking anomaly of Brazil? If we decide that the Spanish, or at least a shared linguistic Latin heritage, is the common thread that unites us, it is a precarious thread indeed. Clearly, there are other official and unofficial languages spoken in Latin America and the Caribbean: Quechua, Aymara, Guarani, French, Hindi, Creole, Lucumí, Papiamento, and English, to name a few. These languages remind us of the indigenous past before successions of European colonizers, African enslavements afterwards, and centuries of transnational migration, end quote. And she continues, when we think on Latinidad, it is important to consider the impact of serial colonialism, open quote. Brazil was under Dutch rule before being conquered by the Portuguese. Jamaica was a Spanish territory before becoming a British colony. The Philippines and Puerto Rico were Spanish colonies before they became US territories. And of course, vast segments of the continental US were previously claimed by the French, the Spanish, and Mexico, end of quote. The notion of serial colonialism is corroborated by Yolanda Martinez San Miguel, who denominated the term extended colonialism, that is, the coexistence of more than one colonial system, Spanish and French in Martinique, Spanish and English in Puerto Rico and Philippines, among many other islands from the English Caribbean, spanning from the 16th century through the present. The archipelagic method recognize the complexities of mixed heritage, multilingualism, and transnational migration by denaturalizing geographic discourse and suggesting new map configurations that respond to a metaphoric understanding of interrelated islands. It considers the distinctive racial and cultural diversity present in Latin America and the Caribbean as a result of the concurrence of transplanted populations from Europe, Asia, and Africa within the modern colonial project. The presence in the region of large Jewish, Arab, Muslim, Buddhist, and Chinese, Japanese, Italian, German, and Slavic communities who can also be of any skin color and should not be considered as homogeneous entities. In this regard, I would like to highlight the work of visual artist Muriel Hasbun, who examines identity and family legacy through an intergenerational, transnational, and transcultural lens. Born to a Salvadoran Palestinian Christian father and a French Polish Jewish mother in El Salvador, Hasbun moved to the US in the 1980s. In the photograph, All the Saints, she presents the most active volcano in Central America located in El Salvador, emitting a Greek Orthodox prayer written by her great-grandfather in Arabic calligraphy. According to Hasbun, she created this photograph to resist institutional prejudice and cultural erasure against Palestinians in El Salvador and to mark their presence in the Salvadoran landscape. She also references the traumatic event of La Matanza in 1932, the killing of about 30,000 mostly indigenous people by order of the dictator Maximiliano Hernández Martínez, using the volcano's eruption as a backdrop to cover the genocide. With no time to more, I just briefly would like to speak about the potential of the Archipelagos method as a poetic tool to foment an international network of women photography organizations, or as I call it, feminist archipelagos, taking as a case of study the photo book Becoming Sisters, women photography collectives and organizations. Becoming Sisters was published in tandem with the 2021 WOFA Congress, a triennial convening that brought together for the first time worldwide women photography collectives and organizations, art historians, theorists, and curators who document the history of women photographers from the 19th century through today. The event presented both national and international discussions about women and feminism in the history of photography. It constitutes a platform to celebrate women and provide an unparalleled network for the international community of women in the photographic arts. The book serves as a registry and collective manifesto of 138 international women and non-binary photographers, collectives, and organizations reframing continental photography history. In the essay spread across 5 sections of the book, I argue that the creation of communities of women photographers based on tenets of solidarity and networking has been a fundamental strategy used historically and through the present to highlight the contributions of women in the photographic arts. To prove this thesis, the essay references the collaborative photo performance El Picnic by artists Nereida García Ferraz from Cuba, Laura González Flores from Mexico, and Eugenia Vargas Pereira from Chile. Sorry. The Ovular Feminist Photography Workshops held in Oregon, the London's Journal by and about Black women working in photography polarized, and the Feminine Division of the Photography Club in Cuba. Simultaneously, 40 collectives and organizations, grouped as 8 island systems within an archipelagic network, are featured and further activated through online and in-person meetings during the pandemic lockdown. Sorry, like as we can see here, the 2021 WOFA Congress, and post-Congress programs, like this time when Anna Fox and Lizzie Ramson came to Miami last year to present the Fast Forward Manifesto, or the symposium that we hosted on the age of visibility in partnership. We co-hosted the symposium in partnership with AWARE, Archives of Women Artists, Research and Exhibitions. And this is a program that we want to continue doing with other organizations. against the idea of highlighting contemporary women photographers as singular creative subjects, becoming sisters centers from a feminist perspective, collaborative practices in photography, and by doing so, encourage new scholarship on the communally shared experiences of women photographers. The WOFA Congress produced an international gathering defined by the social interactions of sisterhood and solidarity. It marked a paradigm shift as we displaced the discussion from the realm of the camera and the right to see others' world to focus on relationality and the collaborative nature of the photographic art. As a matter of conclusions to what constitutes an ongoing research project, the question, what would just an inclusive histories of women's photography look like from a transnational and the colonial perspective keeps resonating. My focus recognized the epistemological turn that in the 60s permeates photography historiography, influenced by postmodernist, feminist, and decolonial theories. Thus, my contribution resides in foregrounding the archipelagic thinking as crucial to debates on photography history. The archipelagic framework helps us to render evident the forms of oppression that narratives of Latinidad produce, while also facilitating more nuanced, interconnected, and situated narratives to complexify our understandings of our histories and the world. Finally, I want to invite you all to the next edition of the WOFA Congress, How Photography Teaches to Live Now, which will take place from October 23rd to the 26th of this year at the Perez Museum, Miami, and several other institutions across South Florida. The event will be focused on women, photography, and pedagogies, and I hope to see you there. If you want to continue to stay in touch, to reach out, these are my social media, and my email as well is there. Thank you so much, and I hope you had like a wonderful time in the conference.